Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you will be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. Hello everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne from Generation to Generation, and our guests today are Ashley and Stan Phelps. Now, we had Ashley on a couple weeks ago, and if you haven't heard that episode, I'll stick it in the description box. But Ashley, Stan, for people that don't know who you are, can you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
Yes. So we are from West Monroe, Louisiana, and we have been married for 23 years. 23 or 24, somewhere around there. And Stan is a deputy sheriff, and he has been in the law enforcement for how many years? 27 years. And I have always been a stay-at-home mom to our kiddos. So we have 4 biological kids. We brought 2 little girls into our family through international adoption, and we are currently in the process of adopting another little girl from China. And so we are a big family. Our oldest son is actually married and has a sweet little boy, Brantley, and they're actually pregnant with their second baby, a sweet little girl. So we have a big family life, and we stay busy, and
grandparents.
Yeah, we're grandparents while we're still adding kids to our family.
I know you've got a YouTube channel for people listening that want to go and find out more about you, follow your journey. Where can they do that?
Yes. Our YouTube channel is called The Phelps Family. And we initially started it just to share our adoption journeys of both of our little girls. But it has turned into us just kind of sharing our life weekly. And our hopes with it is to encourage people to pursue adoption, to hopefully just to share how we do life and be an encouragement to others, and maybe give them a different way of looking at parenting or anything like that. So we share some videos that are, very serious and sit down videos. And then we share a lot that's just like our day-to-day life. So yeah, we love doing that.
Okay. And I'll put those links in the description box. So if you're listening, they're there ready for you to go and check out.
Yeah. And do go and check them out. I mean, this is how we came to ask you to come on. And they, from my perspective, they do very effectively share principles almost that you just share by living your lives. I don't know whether you think, oh, we'll share this principle. It doesn't feel like it. It just feels like it just comes out very naturally because it's a natural part of who you are. So I thought, from the things that I've picked up from the videos, and for listeners, I have never met Stan and Ashley, never been in their home. Everything I'm going to ask is solely from having seen the videos and listened. So I'm going to start off.
They would probably be much more nervous if we had lived in their homes. We did know them. Goodness knows what kind of questions we would ask.
Yes, he's right. He's right.
So you just said, I'm a stay-at-home mum. That is not commonplace mostly these days. From my perspective, people take all sorts of things into consideration about whether they can, whether they want to, whether they should, and all the rest of it. Can you both share your journey in deciding to make that something you are going to be intentional about? And why?
I'll start, and then Stan can chime in. So I grew up, I'm one of 3 kids. My parents are still married. They've been married for, I don't know how long, a really long time. And we grew up, my mom worked in the home, but she was a stay-at-home mom. Like, she had the best of both worlds. And it was very important for her to be at home with her kids. She was the homeschool mom. She went with us on all the field trips, like all of that. And so I grew up, I knew by the time I was 6 or 7 that I wanted to be a mom and I wanted to be at home with my kids. So I definitely had that experience with my own mother that encouraged me into kind of wanting that lifestyle for when I became married and had our own kids. And so when Stan and I met and we were starting to discuss getting married, we both were on the same page with he agreed. He wanted me to be at home with the kids too. And so we got married and I continued to work. The agreement was that I would continue to work until we had our first son, which was Addison. And so sure enough, at that point, we were still renting a townhouse. So we had not bought our first home yet. We had one vehicle. He had a take-home unit. We had no debt. So we were very intentional with our finances to make sure that we weren't living off of two incomes, knowing that in the near future, we were going to be living off of one income, probably for the rest of our lives. And so we didn't incur a lot of debt or really any debt at all. And so from the get-go, we just knew what we wanted for our family. And so sure enough, I worked up until about the 2 weeks before I gave birth to our first son, Addison, and I've been at home ever since. And I love it and couldn't imagine doing anything differently. So what's your take on it?
So I grew up in a home with a stay-at-home mom also. She was a stay-at-home mom probably until I was about 12 when she returned back to college and got her master's degree and then became a dietitian in a hospital. But I always knew that meant a lot to me growing up, having someone in the home, my mother, who could really give me the values that our family had instead of, me spending a third of my time of my life in school and being given the values of someone not in the family or the government. And that's a big thing for me. I've worked for the government my whole life. I do love America, but I want to be the one giving the values to my children, not the government or not someone that doesn't hold the same values, especially if they're not Christian values.
Yeah.
So I hear different responses to that, and I'm going to be a voice for those. I would just add the disclaimer, they're not necessarily mine, but I will put them out there for those who are listening whose questions it might be. What about the area of finances? Because this is a big one. People say we won't be able to manage financially. I need to go out to work. We need the money, etc., etc. How did you tackle that? Because it must have been a part of your discussion. You've addressed it a bit, Stan, but can you talk about it a bit more?
I think one of the big things, especially here in America, you have social media, you have TV, you have friends and family that have made us believe that we really need more than we actually do. So, couples such as us, when we got married, both of us went into the workforce. And most people at that time began basing their budgets around both salaries. And then once you do that, if your plan in the future is for one of you to stay home with the children, it's almost impossible to reverse that. You have to go into it knowing that, hey, listen, whatever extra money we have from the second salary, we're going to put away in savings. We're not going to use that as part of our budget so that when the time does come, in our case, for Ashley to stay home, that it's not a shock and that we don't have debt to worry about. Her leaving the workforce doesn't affect our budgeting, and we don't have to begin to cut things out and stress ourselves over the situation.
Yeah, so we have always been on the same page with just how our finances should look, so to speak. We're fairly simple people. We don't really desire to have a lot of extra things. We don't have that need to kind of keep up with the Joneses next door and they have a new boat and a new car. Those things don't matter to us. So I think you really have to keep your why and your purpose in front of you and knowing okay, money is really tight. Money is just going to be really tight because he's in law enforcement and a one income family, there's not a lot of money to play around with, especially in the early years of our marriage. And, there were times where it could be very frustrating that we have to save all year just to go on one family vacation. But for us, it was extremely important to give our kids those yearly family vacations because of the memories, because those are the things that they're going to remember for the rest of their life, not, the cool bike they had or whatever it may be. So I think you always have to keep at the forefront of your mind, like, why are we doing this? Why have we chosen to live like this? Because your why and your purpose is really what's going to fuel you through those really rough patches where you just kind of feel like I need to throw in the towel, I guess you could say. Throw in the towel, meaning like, let me go get another job or something like that, or let me go into debt so that I can kind of keep up with what my neighbor's doing. That's kind of what I meant, not like throw in the towel with our marriage.
Or the kids.
What do you mean?
I didn't mean it like that.
Stan's like, wait, that's news to me.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Oh, okay. We will book that one.
We can do one where it's more like a counselling session. We can talk through some of the issues that come up from this conversation.
That could be interesting.
So what about the question that comes up? Oh, I would be bored. I won't be fulfilled. I have an ambition. I shall lose my identity. All these things. What about that?
I'll say something about that and then let Ashley talk because it's her that stays home. But the first thing I would say to somebody like that is, if your identity is in your work, you've already begun with a problem. Your work is not your identity. Your work is there to make money for your family to survive in life. Your identity has to be in something else. And as Christians, it should be in Christ. And so I would say to anybody that would say something like that, you really need to refocus your priorities and what your purpose is here in life. So,
yeah. I have never, this is what I've wanted to do since I was very, very young. So I have not really dealt with many of those emotions or thoughts or anything like that. But what I would say to mamas who feel that way is, I think, like Stan just said, kind of having this skewed view of like where your identity lies and where it comes from. You have a skewed view on what motherhood really is and like how important your job is. I don't think women get I'm gonna cry multiple times. I don't think they get the gravity of what it means to raise a child, to raise a human being you're hopefully going to send off into the world to be, an amazing functioning adult. I think so. You have to really look at it as this is the most important job you will ever do. And I can tell you to, take care of yourself and schedule weekly self-care dates for yourself. And, I can tell you to do all of those things, but none of that's going to change your mindset into knowing you have the most important job in the entire world. And knowing that what you're doing matters, knowing that, I used to listen to a podcast and have one of their devotional books. It's called Risen Motherhood. And they are so good about implementing the gospel into motherhood. Because I know so many mothers, you can go day to day, cleaning up snot and vacuuming and cleaning up toys and running to therapy and like doing all those things that seem very mundane. And you feel like you have no purpose. Like, what am I really doing? How is this? What is my purpose here? But it was so good in just seeing how the Lord chose us for these kids, specifically chose us. And he has given us a great commission to not only, take care of these kids and raise them and keep the house functioning and all of that, but to guide these children and to lead them to Christ. And everything you do every single day matters. And everything you do, kind of like what Daphne said a while ago, how you've watched our YouTube videos. And while we don't have to like blurt out our principles and how we live every day, you can see it through our actions. And I don't think mothers really understand that in their actions, there's so much that's being told and said. And that's, I feel like that's a pretty big deal.
You want to just say something? I just want to make one quick comment before you do. I pull people up when you say, what do you do? Say, well, I'm only a mum. I just stay at home. Like when they say that to me, I go, wait. Let's rephrase that. You need to hold up your head and to say, I am a stay-at-home mum. I am a mother, for lots of the reasons that you say.
Yeah, and I know you want to ask about something else, but I really like, you talking about your willingness to sacrifice in order to spend more time with the kids and helping to raise and spending more time with them than the education system, than maybe the government. It's something that we address when we travel, we speak at conferences about the importance of parents discipling their kids. And, often there's that question of, well, but I'm so busy with work and, I get home late. And we're like, well, if you're too busy to raise and disciple your kids, then you are too busy. So what's going to give? And we say to them, and you do more so really, that, if work is taking you away from your kids, then quit your job. Go live in a cardboard box in the street if that's what it takes for you to be the one who's primarily raising your kids. And so I appreciate that in what you're saying, you're talking about all the sacrifice. How do we live? It takes us maybe a year to be able to have one holiday, but these are sacrifices that you are willing to make in order to be the primary people pouring into your kids. So I really appreciate hearing that.
And how can you live out Deuteronomy 6 if you're not at home? When you get up, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, how can you do that if you haven't got them? So, next question. How do you not only look after all these amazing children, and they are amazing children, and homeschool? Is that not saying, well, that's just putting an extra load on? Now, not much point, in my opinion, staying to be a stay-at-home mum if they're all in school, so it doesn't quite make sense. But talk to us about homeschooling along with being a mum. Or dad.
Well, she's the one that does all the homeschooling, so I'm going to let her talk about that.
Well, homeschooling was something that we discussed, I think, when Addison was just real little, and it was just one of those things. It really wasn't even a big discussion, I don't think. It was just like, we're going to homeschool. And of course,
I think initially we had decided to homeschool just until they entered high school.
Yeah, that's right.
That was our initial decision. But then when it came time for high school, we began to realize that those are formative years, that we're sending those kids off before they're actually, in my opinion, ready to go into the world and make a difference. And so those formative years, we decided, let's just keep them home. And so we ended up, Addison, our oldest son, who's now married, he just began working at the same law enforcement agency that I work for. And he's never been in a normal school in his entire life. But most people wouldn't know that because they think he's a very mature, wise young man.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So homeschooling, again, especially with homeschooling, I have to remind myself, homeschooling's a big load to carry. It's hard. Now we've got, 6, almost 7 kids. But back when it was just our 4 biological kids that we were homeschooling, they're cut from the same mold here, but they are so completely different, and their learning styles are completely different, and how we interact with each other is different, just with different personalities. And so that has always been extremely challenging, just for me, learning how to teach all these different learning styles and personality styles. So it has always been very challenging for me, but what keeps me going is, like he said, is we are their main influence. We are the ones pouring into them, not other teachers, and they're amazing teachers, just not other people at these schools, friends, faculty, what coaches, whatever it may be. And as wonderful as they may be, they're not their parents, and they don't truly have their best interest in heart like Stan and I would and do. And so for me, I just think of the alternative, and I literally think about them going to high school these days, and the high school these days is scary. And I'm like, yeah, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. It's not about protecting them and like putting them in a little bubble and sheltering them from everything in the world. That's not, I mean, Stan and I, we talk about very real life situations with our kids. So it's not about like protecting their little eyes and ears, but it's just, yeah, I want to be the main influence in their life right now. And they've got the rest of their lives to grow up and move out and live how they want. But these, like Stan said, these formative years right now are so crucial and so important. And that's what keeps me going on homeschooling days. That's really challenging, really tough. I just want to throw in the towel. And some days I do throw in the towel. But the good thing is you can pick up the next day and like keep going. So, again, our purpose and our why is much bigger than my frustrations that I might have with it here and there. And so that's what keeps us going.
And one thing I like on your videos is when you talk about something, you do get the how and the why almost automatically, because I watch a few people, not many, but I do. But I'm not impressed with what people do. I'm more interested in the how and the why, because that says your value. So taking another family example of yours, you have your son who's married to what looks like, from the outside looking in, an amazing young woman, sold out for Jesus and beautiful with her son. Can we track backwards now through into your teenagers? Because you have some very clear, it's not opinions because you live it out, but you have some very clear way that you have guided them as far as dating, as far as marriage, as far as all that. You have some very, very clear principles that you have lived out, which many people would go, I cannot believe you even got away with that. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I think we started talking about this, early on when Addison was little. But a lot of what we believe about dating, besides just coming from the Bible, comes from our own experiences. And I looked back in my life, I wasn't a Christian till right before we got married. I grew up in a Christian home. I had, wonderful mother and father and brother and sister. I was always in church, and I attended some great churches. But I was one of those people who I was self-deceived into believing just because one time I had prayed a prayer in my life that somehow, I'm safe, I'm going to heaven, when actually, in actuality, there was no desire to follow Christ. There was no love for him. And so I would read scriptures, I would realize I'm not a new creature. I have the mental assent up here, but there's nothing different about me here. And so being a American Christian, I just lived like the world. And I wasn't really a Christian. And so when I dated, it wasn't about what we call dating should be, which is to look for someone as a spouse who has the characteristics, the values, the character, the relationship with Christ that you would want in a husband or wife. And so I would pretty much just use girls for my own benefit. And I'm sure they were doing the same with me. But when I went out on a date, there was never the intention of me looking, saying, is this the person I would want to marry one day? And so we began to tell our kids, hey, listen, this is the purpose of what we call dating. Many people can call it by a different name, but you need to have fun with your friends. But when you decide you want to start going out with someone one-on-one to date, you need to be looking for someone and be prepared that, hey, if I find this person, it begins to get serious. So we limited our children to the age of 16. Before they're 16, I don't think there's any reason, at least in our situation, for kids to be looking for a potential mate in the future. So when they do become 16 years old, if they come to us and say, hey, Dad, we found this person that we're interested in, they hold the characteristics of someone we would probably like to marry one day, they follow Christ, then we say, hey, listen, well, they need to come talk to us. And so they'll come sit down with me, and it's a pretty intense conversation. It's not a 5-minute, hey, how are you? Introduce yourself, and sure, you can take my kid.
Are they talking to the sheriff or the dad? Which one are they?
No, they're talking to the dad. In a situation with my kids, I think the dad is much more stern and protective than the deputy is.
Okay.
And so I've had some serious, very in-depth conversations about some things that most of the kids, their eyes get really big. They're surprised I say certain things to them or ask them certain questions that they're not used to. But if you're going to begin a relationship with one of my children, I need to have answers to very important life questions. And until you give them to me satisfactory, you're not going anywhere with my child. And so once I feel that they do hold those values, then we don't let them leave the house together and begin going to the movies or the restaurants. We tell them, okay, at this point, you need to sit down with each other and you need to begin to talk. And that's something most teenagers, especially in America, do not do. They go out to movies, they don't talk. They go to a restaurant, they have small talk.
They go to parties.
Yeah, they don't get to know each other. And so then later on, when they have all these emotions rolling, they think, oh, I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. And then they end up marrying this person. And then they find out within the first year, they don't even know who they're marrying because they haven't spent the time learning each other. So that's what we do with our children. We encourage them, or we tell them, for the first year of this relationship. And I'm giving you the timetables, but it could be different for each child, depending on the relationship, the maturity of the children involved. But we'll use Addison, our oldest son, for example. When they first did this, most people thought we were really kooky and weird. They thought this will never work. Your children will rebel.
I had one friend, we were running together and we hold a lot of the same values. But when I was telling her that Addison, this is kind of how we're going to maneuver through this with Addison because he was our first, she literally laughed at me and she said, do you really think you can do that? And I'm like, I'm the parent. Yes, I do think I can do that. I mean, it blew my mind because the concept and these boundaries that we have created when it comes to dating is so foreign. And parents these days, they just feel like the kids have all the control. So they just let them have it. Because that's what she was telling me. She was essentially saying, you cannot do that. You can't control what your son does. I mean, you're just going to have to let him go. And I was like, wow.
But I'd just say one thing that said to me on similar thing. Well, no, to Daniela again. Somebody was talking to her.
Who's Daniela?
Huh?
Who's Daniela?
Oh, Daniela, Andrew's sister. Or my daughter.
I figured that's who it was.
Yeah, sorry. She's a couple of years younger. She heads up our anti-human trafficking part of the ministry.
Okay.
Anyways, somebody said to her, and I overheard this, and it was another question, have you ever backslidden? And she said the same thing. And she said, no, I haven't. And they said, why? Now, the answer she gave, I managed to keep my mouth shut and just smiling sweetly and thinking, I don't respond to this. They said, why haven't you? And she said, because my mum never let me. And I'm like, I didn't control your salvation and your walk. But, I just smiled sweetly. And when we got home, I was sort of, casually said, hey, what did you mean about that? You know how you do these things you're dying to ask in the most casual and body language, yes. Right, and everything. And she said this. She said, Mum, during her teenage years, my friends' parents were afraid to say no and were afraid to discipline and afraid to challenge. And she said, I saw them go so far away, the parents couldn't get them back. But you never let me go that far. And if I had gone, you'd have been able to get me back. So I offer you that as an encouragement from my family to yours. And you can do it. Anyway, Stan, you were going to say some more and I interrupted.
So when Addison and Rainey were dating, even Rainey will tell you today that she trusted us, but she thought, this is very weird. This is not how most American kids date. And at the end of the year, they spent here at the house, probably 20 feet from us in another room, but they would sit there and ask questions of one another, learning each other and learning about what each other wanted in a potential mate in the future, how they wanted to raise their children, or whether they, one of them wanted to be the stay-at-home parent, or questions such as that, or, even theological or doctrinal differences that are very important. And at the end of the year, I brought them both together and I was like, you still feel that both of you are the one that you potentially want to spend the rest of your life with? And they were like, yes. And so I said, okay, well, y'all are free to go now, and you can begin going out with each other out of the house and going and doing things. And their answer was pretty much, no, we like to sit and talk to one another, and which is the whole point. If you can't sit and talk to your potential spouse or future spouse and enjoy it, you don't need to be marrying this person. Because that's what you're going to be doing for 50 plus years, is talking to one another. And if you're not going to have a very successful or loving marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. And when he says that we said, we let them get out, like during that first year, Rainey would come over and go to family functions with us, and Addison would go to her family's house. But the whole, environment in which we said, okay, here's your boundaries, like as long as you're with family and you're in a group, that's totally fine. And, so we didn't have them locked in a house, which I feel like some people are going to think that that's what it was. But it was really like Addison was at Rainey's house with parental supervision, and her parents knew. So like, this is another thing that I don't think parents do. They don't take the initiative, just like we were saying a while ago, because when Addison decided he was liking Rainey and they kind of wanted to pursue a relationship, I picked up the phone and called Rainey's mother, because I was very this was our first rodeo with a teenager. So I was a little hypersensitive, a little bit, sort of.
They might not know. You know what rodeo is?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know what rodeo is?
Well, I didn't know they had a rodeo.
I mean, we don't have big rodeos over here, but yeah, I mean, we wear our cowboy boots. This wasn't my first ball game. Well,
this was my first ball game, I guess I could say. Anyways, and I picked up the phone and I called her and I said, look, here's our expectations when Addison is at your house, parental supervision, like here's kind of like how we're raising our kids. And she told me exactly kind of how they're raising their kids, and it very much meshed together. So we were on the same page. So I feel like that's super important. And I had a lot of people, like other mamas, shocked that I would actually pick up the phone and call Rainey's mother to discuss our children's dating relationship, which is bizarre to me, because I feel like that's the logical, wise, important step in the process here. Because if my child is going to be at someone else's house, I need to know who these people are. What kind of environment is he in? Like, what do they talk about? What are they listening to? All those things.
What do they feel about protecting their child's chastity until marriage? Because some parents, especially in America, even that claim to be Christians, they don't find that important anymore. They think, oh, well, this is what teenage kids are going to do. You can't stop it. And while I agree it is what the majority of teenage kids do in America, yes, you can stop it. And it's your obligation as a parent, not only to your children, but to God, to raise them and show them what is truly important. And what is truly important is that when you marry, that you're able to look at not only your spouse, but at God and say, yeah, I obeyed you. I followed through on obedience on something that was hard. And you just don't see a lot of that, even in the church today.
Yeah. And it's quite shocking because Addison and Rainey got married. Addison was 18. He had just graduated high school. And Rainey was like, I don't know, 19. She was almost, okay. And so they were very young, but they had already been together for 2 years. They knew they wanted to be together. And of course, not every 18-year-old and 20-year-old is ready to get married. And we're not saying that our other kids are ready to get married at 18. But for this particular relationship, they had our blessing to get married. But we had Christian adults who would almost mock us and mock Addison and Rainey. Oh, they're getting married. She got pregnant, didn't she? That's why they're getting married so young. Or if we would tell them, or they would say, yeah, we're still virgins. We're waiting till we get married. They'd laugh at them. And it was so insulting because I can understand the world. I can understand non-Christians, laughing at that. But for Christians who say they follow Christ themselves, and to sit there and mock two teenagers who have chosen to remain virgins until they get married, was mind-blowing to me, because you don't see that. You don't even see that among Christians these days. So
professing
Christians.
But
I'm sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, no, you carry on.
I was going to say all of this, one thing that I think is really important here is none of this, all of these kind of boundaries and guidelines and kind of how we want to pursue our kids' dating and the teenage life. We didn't just wake up one day when they were 15 years old and we decided okay, here's how we're going to do everything. Because if you wait till they're 15 and they decide they like a boy or they like a girl, they're going to buck all these rules. You have to start when they're young. Young. I mean, Stan has always been great. When our boys and even Emerson, when they're toddlers and just passing, he'll say, oh, I'm going to cry. He'll be like, boys, when you get married, find a woman that loves Jesus like your mama does. Or boys, when you get married, you need to find a wife like your mama. She works hard for our family and she takes such good care of you. He modeled what kind of man Emerson needs to pursue and look for. So it has to be a life example, and our words can only go so far with them, but our actions go further. So while we don't have a perfect marriage and we've had our ups and downs and we get mad and angry with each other, at the end of the day, what our kids are seeing is a godly marriage, and one that, yes, we have strife and we have struggles, but we always come back to each other and we always, are finding ways to point ourselves, our marriage, our children to Jesus. So I just feel like that's a huge, huge part of it, is just starting very young, but also modeling what we want for our children in the future.
Yeah, we say
Poor Andrew, just spit it out. We're going to keep interrupting you.
You can cut me off as much as you want. Don't worry about it.
And I think, and what she was saying real quick, and I know this is on marriage now, not on parenting, but one of the important things in parenting your children for them to see, you don't want to have all your arguments in front of them, but they also need to understand that while mom and dad are presenting a true biblical marriage to them, but they also need to understand that we're different personalities. And so we still have conflict at times. We don't always agree, which surprisingly we do, but most people are not going to agree as much as we do. But they need to know that even when we do argue and when we get really mad at one another, and sometimes we hold bitterness for weeks at a time, that we always come back to each other, and that while the purpose is because we're married, ultimately, no matter what happens, we're coming back to each other because of Christ. Because this is not only a covenant here, but when I married her, it's a covenant between me and Christ and her. And so that is more important to me than even Ashley. And she's very important. But I don't want to disappoint him. That's how I know that I love him, because I continue to obey him.
Yeah. You kind of took the words out of my mouth, but I was just going to say that we sometimes say to people that often, number one, kids know there's an issue, whether you tell them or not. They pick up on those things. And so you can think you're hiding it from the kids, but in reality, the kids know there's a problem. You're just not letting them see how you work that through. And we say that's the main thing, is that when there is a problem, that's not really the issue. The issue is that the kids see how you work through those problems, because they're going to have problems themselves. And so you're modeling to them, when these problems come, how do you then deal with it? How do you walk through those situations? I was going to ask about something else, but do you want to say something about
this?
You can
do. What one were you going to ask?
We'll see if it's going in the same angle. I'll start, and then you could take it another direction if you want. So, we've heard some about how you raised your kids, your biological kids. When you started to look at adoption, we've heard stories, some of the videos, or when we had Ashley on, we talked a bit about this, and how, there were times where you two might be really struggling with a decision to make about these children you were going to adopt. And it would be your kids that came to you and encouraged you and gave you a kick up the butt to say, what were you talking about? Like, this is clearly the right thing to do. So when you started looking at the issue of adoption, and you first took this to your children, how did that go? What was their response to it? How did you walk through that?
Got a crowd.
So I think the responses that came from our children that we initially got really were just based out of the way we had raised our children. I'll be honest, I was very surprised with how open our children were. I remember one time, for example, and I'm using this as an example, but it took me by surprise. Our son Jackson was, I don't remember his age at the time. I'm guessing he was about, when did we adopt Mika? Was it 5 years?
Yeah, so he was like.
So I think after Mika's adoption about 4 years ago, he was probably 7, 8. And they kept asking us, when are we going to adopt again? Because they knew we had talked, hey, we're not stopping with one. We're going to continue to adopt until either God tells us, okay, stop, or the government comes in and says, okay, that's enough, no more, you're too old, or something like that, which probably isn't going to be far from me. But he said, when are we going to adopt again? And I said, Jackson, I really don't know. I said, we moved into this house because we needed more bedrooms. And then as soon as we did, God began bringing more kids. And now we need a bigger house with more bedrooms. And I said, so we have to find places to put them. And the next day he came in and says, Dad, I have the answer.
I don't know what he's fixing to say. I'm already crying.
And he said,
we're criers as well on it, as you know. We cry numerous times.
I know where another child can stay. And I said, where? And he said, well, in my bed. And I said, well, Jackson, you and your brother have bunk beds. I don't know if y'all know what bunk beds are, where they're stacked on top of each other. And I said, there's no room for one other kid. And he goes, no, Dad, not one other kid. And I said, Jackson, there's not room for 2 kids in your bed, much less more than 2 kids. And he says, yeah, Dad, there is. I thought about it last night. And if we turn to the side and let our legs hang off the bed, we can probably get 4 to 5 kids in that bed. And that just pierced me, because I thought, who raised these kids? We're not that good of people. I wouldn't sacrifice that much. I mean, I'll sacrifice a little, but there's a limit. And all he could think about is there's kids in the world that need help, and somebody's got to get them. And he was willing to sacrifice practically everything he knew as a small child.
Oh, your bed is your kingdom. And if you're willing to give up your bed, that's the world.
It's your thing.
I slept like that up a mountain in India because I had young people with me, and they were in 2 beds, about 4 of us. So we slept like that. And I can tell you, it's not something I would willingly volunteer.
No.
But, so how did they, I mean, you raised them. I just want to reflect that back. Who raised them? You raised them. And it is the fruit of much that you're saying, and much that, you won't be able to have time to talk about on this. But so you have these 2 beautiful girls in your home, and both of them have extra challenges that you have to walk through with them. I mean, all children have challenges, but that they came with a few more. It can't always be easy. There must be times when you're challenged, maybe by Isabel crying or by things going on, and your children are trying to live life in the middle of this, plus they're homeschooled, and your mum and all these things. How have your children coped with this completely different change of lifestyle, although now it must almost be lifestyle?
I can't, hold on. I honestly, so like when we were in the adoption process of Michaela and Isabel, and we were raising money to fund the adoptions because it's about $35,000. Like I said earlier in the podcast, we always go on family vacations to the beach. But when we were in the middle of raising funds for both of our adoptions, we would forego our beach family vacation because we spend a good bit of money, and we don't feel it right that if, that we go and spend money on a vacation while we're trying to raise money for these adoptions. And we just told our kids that, like, this is, we just feel like whatever money we have, we need to put towards the adoption. And we don't want to ask people for money while we're going out spending money. Anyways, the kids never once complained, ever. And I think the reason why is because we've always been so vocal with them. Even when they're 4 and 5 years old, we keep them in the know of what's going on, why this is going on, why are we making these decisions. So while they don't have to know every decision about our adulting life, parenting life, they know a lot. And I feel like that's very important, is just to keep them in the know and really they are part of our family, but truly let them be a part of our family and be a part of our decision making, or at least have a voice or opinion. So I think the fact that we kept them in the know and we would ask them their opinions and we would explain things to them, like, they never questioned, and they never, I promise y'all, never once complained, ever. It's amazing. But, Michaela, it was very easy bringing her into our family. She just bonded very quickly. She's just very easygoing. The kids just fell in love with her immediately. Isabel, same, fell in love with her immediately. They loved her immediately, but she came with a lot of challenges. I mean, she would scream for hours.
She would beat herself.
I mean,
through her stimming.
Yeah.
There was a morning we went in there, and she was bruised and bloody, and she had spent all night just hitting herself in the face. So it was stuff that we weren't really, we're usually prepared. I like to prepare. I'm a planner, but these are things we couldn't have prepared for, because you don't see you don't see very many children in the world, most people don't, that have this many extreme needs.
Yeah. And you could tell it would stress our kids out, obviously, at times, or they would be like, oh man, I just wish she would quit crying. But honestly, that was the extent and has been the extent of their complaining. And the reason why, and I cry every time I say this, I have to tell myself a lot this. The reason why they don't complain a whole lot is because they know their why and their purpose. They know why we have Isabel in our home. They know that if it were not for us choosing to say yes to her, she would be dead. Like, they know that their complaints of being tired of hearing crying doesn't even compare to the life that she lived for 5 years in that orphanage, tied to a bed, neglected. Like, there's no comparison. So I know my kids do this, and sometimes we say it in a joking manner, like, okay, but we'll sometimes joke about our frustrations, but there's a lot of times where I have to verbally tell myself, like, Ashley, do you remember why you brought her into your home? Okay. And do you remember what she lived prior to coming into your home? Okay, then shut up. None of your excuses, none of your complaints even remotely add up to what that little girl has lived through. So I know that's exactly how we've gotten through it with Isabel, just knowing, again, going back to your purpose, going back to your why are you doing this? And just really, like, you just got to pull yourself out of the funk, because you can't stay there. I mean, that's just not any way to live.
Yeah.
Well, as we're drawing to a close, I just want to make a couple of reflections. First of all, Stan, I just want to say that in watching these videos, I mean, Ashley's on it a lot, she's doing it and that, but from my perspective, you learn a lot about the Father Heart of God from you on those. And the most moving one to me, I mean, I could quote several times. I have to tell you, I don't sit all day every day watching your videos. It's not where
Not all day, half the day. Half the day is
enough,
watching videos.
And I didn't watch them because of the podcast. We're doing the podcast because of the
videos.
Because of the videos. But I think the moment that moved me most was when you went to bring Isabel home, and she was in that stroller, and there were people all around, and most people walk up and they'd say hello to the people, the adults that were standing there, and make themselves known. You had one eye only, and that was for that little girl. You went straight away, you picked her up out of the pit, and you brought her to yourself. And that was such a profound moment to me, and I hope to many others, as well as seeing the interaction that you have with your girls. And I just wanted to reflect that back. The other thing, I want to tweak something you said, Stan. You said, I'm not talking about parenting, we're talking about marriage. Would I say marriage is parenting? Because it's like you say, if you get the parenting, if you get the marriage bit right, that's a huge part of your parenting and what you're
Actually,
modeling.
she would probably say she's parenting me.
Yeah, well, however you want to walk it out, that's it. It's just, I mean, there are so many more questions we could ask, but I hope this is an encouragement to both of you as well, to just have a little insight how right across the ocean in England, the impact that you doing that has made, and keep doing it. The challenges will come. People will say things, as we all know, but just keep going, because I can tell you the message you're sending out is profound, and we honour you for that.
Yeah, thank you both so much for taking the time. I think there's a lot in here that people can listen to and learn from, take away and apply to their own lives. And I guess a piece I just pull out for myself is, again, for people listening that have kids, really focus on being the primary person pouring into their lives, because you want to see your values raised in them, and not necessarily the values of the world system which is pouring into them. Okay, go
I
on.
want to add something else to that. And this is going down a whole other route, but I'm going to say
We're wrapping up here.
We are wrapping
okay.
up. But you said at that point, I would say from my own experience, don't hand over the discipleship of your children to the church either.
You are opening up another can of worms.
Yeah, I am, but it matters. So
We-
anyway, we'll
we
go on.
agree.
We'll have another conversation about
Parents,
that.
That's right.
people
Yeah.
listening, raising kids, be the primary person pouring into them, whether it's in the school, the church, wherever you are. Hear how Stan and Ashley did this, a bit willingness to self-sacrifice in order to see their kids raised in the way that they would like to see them raised. Ashley, Stan, thank you so much. We really appreciate you for taking the time. I know you're crazy busy, so thank you.
For having us. We love visiting with y'all.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If it inspired you, please rate us and subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or another podcast platform.